Frances Swaggart sat in silence for a moment, the room heavy with anticipation. Then, with a trembling breath, she finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but every word carried the weight of years. For the first time, she began to reveal the truth, the hidden story behind the music that shaped June's life. What she said wasn't just a memory, it was a confession, a revelation that pulled back the curtain on the pain, the passion, and the power that fueled every note. And as her words poured out, it became clear this was the missing piece everyone had been searching for. For years, people wondered what kind of music spoke to Jimmy's soul. What voices gave him peace when the weight of the world was too heavy to carry? Frances Swaggart sat quietly before answering. With emotion in her voice, she revealed that she had held onto this secret for a long time, a deeply personal list, not for the headlines, but for the heart. Because behind the preacher, behind the spotlight, was a man who found strength and comfort in the voices that became his private prayers. And now, for the very first time, she felt the world needed to hear it. With a warm smile and a deep breath, Frances finally said, "Let me tell you about the 6 gospel singers Jimmy loved the most." Frances talked in a tone of introspection while leaning back. For Jimmy, she clarified, music was never about amusement or background noise. It was his faith's beating heart. As a child growing up in a small Louisiana town, gospel music was the sound that got him through difficult times and gave him hope when things were unclear. Frances remembered how Jimmy used to tell her that gospel music was what gave him the confidence to preach when he first felt compelled to do so. Music gave him strength anytime he was worn out or felt the strain of ministry pressing down on him. She recalled the peaceful evenings when Junie would sit with his eyes closed and his lips moving softly, as though in prayer, while listening to an old CD. Because music spoke to the heart in ways that words sometimes couldn't, he believed that the proper song might uplift a person more than any sermon. Frances claimed that he always brought music with him, even when he traveled the world and met thousands of people. Sometimes in recollection, and other times on a record. It served as a reminder that God was near and that faith communicated through music could brighten even the darkest of nights, no matter how challenging the path became. As she started talking about the first gospel artist that made Jimmy feel something, Frances gave him a gentle grin. She stated that Jimmy first heard this strong voice on a radio late one evening when he was a little boy. Even though the world might not have known the singer's identity, Jimmy would never forget that voice. According to Frances, Jimmy frequently referred to the experience as life-changing. He could sense God's presence in the tiny room where he sat, since the psalm was so pure and passionate. Something inside him was sparked by that voice, a fire that would eventually mold his own vocation. Frances recalled Jimmy telling her that, rather than singing for popularity, he would close his eyes and visualize himself singing those sensible words to help people become more like Christ. She revealed that Jimmy retained the inspiration the voice had instilled in his heart and brought that memory with him the first time he sang in church. Frances said softly that it was the beginning of everything since Jimmy was shown what true worship was all about by the singer's voice. As Frank talked about the second performer on Jimmy's list, her voice became softer. In contrast to the previous, Jimmy did not merely admire this person. This singer became into a real buddy. Frances clarified that their connection went beyond music. It was founded on a profound respect for one another's vocation and a common religion. She recalled times in the nights when the two guys would sit together and sing old songs till it was becoming late. They would do this while holding guitars. Their voices melded together in a way that Jimmy frequently described as being like harmony crafted in paradise. When the journey seemed lengthy and lonely, this friend gave him encouragement and reminded Jimmy that even God's servants require company. Frances recalled a specific instance in which Jimmy was criticized without proof. This gospel performer supported him, joined him in prayer, and reminded him of the reason he initially responded to God's call. Jimmy saw this vocalist as more than just a gifted performer. He supported him when he needed it most, and he was a brother in Christ. Jimmy always believed that God placed the singer in his life, not only to inspire him through music, but to walk alongside him as a friend, Frances said with a smile as she concluded the remembrance. As Frances started discussing the third performer on Jimmy's list, her face softened. She claimed that because it helped Jimmy get through some of the most trying times in his life, this specific voice had a very unique place in Jimmy's heart. Jimmy would turn to singers' music whenever he was going through a difficult time, whether it was in his ministry or in his personal life. Francis recalled evenings when Jimmy would return home, weary and burdened, and he would sit in silence and allow the singer's melodies to soothe him like a healing rain. Even though the lyrics were straightforward, Jimmy needed strength and optimism in those circumstances, and the way they were performed conveyed that. Frances claimed that she frequently saw him close his eyes while his lips quivered in prayer, as if the music gave him the strength to continue. This singer's gift to Jimmy went beyond just skill. It served as a lifeline. It reminded him that while faith remained strong, no trial was too tremendous and no valley was too deep. Frances gave a quiet explanation. Every time Jimmy heard the voice, it was as though God himself was saying, "You are not alone." When Frances talked about the fourth singer Jimmy loved, her eyes brightened. This vocalist was renowned for having strength, power, and unwavering faith that could fill a room, in contrast to the soft sounds that soothed him during quiet moments. According to Frances, Jimmy appreciated the authority this singer's voice possessed, almost like a sermon wrapped in song. Jimmy experienced a rush of energy whenever he listened, reminiscent of his childhood revival gatherings, where everyone would clap, yell, and worship with all of their hearts. Frances remembered how Jimmy would occasionally perform these songs before taking the stage himself, perhaps finding strength in the audacity of that voice. What moved Jimmy the most? She clarified, adding that it was the sincerity as much as the skill. Every note was infused with conviction, demonstrating the singer's genuine love for Christ. Jimmy once said, "That voice reminds me that serving God is not a burden, but a joy." Francis recalled this. He said, "This singer was a living reminder that faith should never be timid, but strong and full of fire." Francis laughed and said, "Jimmy always believed that this singer's music was a spark from heaven, lighting up the hearts of everyone who heard it." When France mentioned the fifth singer on Jimmy's list, her tone grew softer. She clarified that the humility that permeated every phrase, in addition to the music's beauty, was what made this vocalist unique. Jenny frequently remarked that the singer's voice was gentle and sincere, like a silent prayer. Although it wasn't ostentatious or theatrical, it had an emotional impact that words could never match. Frances remembered Jimmy's admiration for this singer's innocence, someone who just wished to exalt God and never pursued celebrity or publicity. She recalled nights when Jimmy would play the music of this singer in their house, bringing a serene aura that calmed them both. She replied quietly, "It seemed like the world slowed down for a while, and the sweetness of God's love was all that was left." Jimmy frequently told her that this artist served as a reminder to him of what real ministry should entail, not focusing on fame, but on serving with humility. When she completed her thinking, Frances grinned. Jimmy always had a great deal of regard for this kind person, since they showed the essence of God via their straightforward melodies. After a little silence, Frances discussed the last vocalist on Jim's list. She sounded as though she understood the significance of this memory. This artist was more than simply another voice Jimmy liked. She clarified, he held this one in the highest regard. Sometimes their music reverberated through the rooms late at night when Jimmy needed solace, and other times they played softly in the background at supper in the Swaggart house. Francis recalled how he used to hum along in a low voice, feeling better with every song he knew. She clarified that Jimmy's personal connection to the artist each time he listened was what made her so unique. In addition to being exquisite, the music touched his heart and served as a very intimate reminder of God's love. Frances claimed that Jimmy frequently informed her that he always brought the singer's recordings with him, regardless of where he went or how hectic his life got. These were the songs he kept coming back to, even when his life slowed down in his final years. Frances smiled softly and remarked, "This was the singer Jimmy never let go of, the one whose voice he carried in his heart until the very end." Frances spoke in a soft but profound voice as she leaned forward a little. She clarified that, contrary to popular belief, Jimmy's pick of 6 performers was never about favorites. He didn't care about fame, popularity, or even the extent of a singer's skill. The message that permeated the music was what Jimmy cared about. Every performer he loved had a strong devotion to Christ, and every song they sung reflected that love. According to Francis, Jimmy felt that gospel music was most effective when it led listeners to God rather than highlighting the artist. He was drawn to these 6 voices for that reason. They reminded him that adoration was the real function of music. Francis remembered Jimmy's many warnings to young